Storm over Warlock by Andre Norton, Chapter 11. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by R.J. Davis. Storm over Warlock by Andre Norton, Chapter 11, The Witch. There were patches of light in the inner valley marking these fluorescent plants, some creeping at ground level, others tall as saplings. On other nights, Shan had welcomed that wan radiance, but now he lay in as relaxed a position as possible, marking each of those potential betrayers as he tried to counterfeit the attitude of sleep and at the same time plan out his route. He had purposely settled in a pool of shadow, the wolverines beside him, and he thought that the bulk of the animals' bodies would cover his own withdrawal when the time came to move. One arm lying limply across his middle was in reality clutching to him an intricate arrangement of small hide straps which he had made by sacrificing most of the remainder of his painfully acquired thongs. The trap must be set in place soon. Now that he had charted a path to the critical point, avoiding all light plants, Shan was ready to move. The Terran pressed his hand on Taggi's head in the one imperative command the wolverine was apt to obey. The order to stay where he was. Shan sat up and gave the same voiceless instruction to Togi. Then he inched out of the hollow, a worm's progress to that narrow way along the cliff top. The path which anyone or anything coming up from the sea gate on the beach would have to pass in order to witness the shoreline occupied by the half-built outrigger. So much of his plan was based upon luck and guesses, but those were all Shan had. And as he worked at the stretching of his snare, the Terran's heart pounded, and he tensed at every sound out of the night. Having tested all the anchoring of his net, he tugged at a last knot and then crouched to listen not only with his ears, but with all his strength of mind and body. Pound of waves, whistle of wind, the sleepy complaint of some bird, a regular splashing, one of the fish in the lagoon, or what he awaited. The Terran retreated as noiselessly as he had come, heading for the hollow where he had bedded down. He reached there breathless, his heart pumping, his mouth dry as if he had been racing. Taggi stirred and thrust a nose inquiringly against Shan's arm, but the wolverine made no sound, as if he too realized that some menace lay beyond the rim of the valley. Would that other come up the path Shan had trapped, or had he been wrong? Was the enemy already stalking him from the other beach? The grip of his stunner was slippery in his damp hand. He hated this waiting. The canoe. His work on it had been a careless blotching. Better to have the job done right. Why, it was perfectly clear now how he had been mistaken. His whole work plan was wrong. He could see the right way of doing things laid out as clear as a blueprint in his mind. A picture in his mind. Shan stood up and both wolverines moved uneasily, though neither made a sound. A picture in his mind. But this time he wasn't asleep. He wasn't dreaming a dream, to be used for his own defeat. Only that other could not know this. The pressure which had planted the idea of new work to be done in his mind, an idea one part of him accepted as fact, had not taken warning from his move. He was supposed to be under control. The Terran was sure of that. All right, so he would play that part. He must if he would entice the trapper into his trap. He holstered his stunner, walked out into the open, paying no heed now to the patches of light through which he must pass on his way to the path his own feet had already worn to the boat beach. As he went, Shan tried to counterfeit what he believed would be the gait of a man under compulsion. Now he was on the rim fronting the downslope, fighting against his desire to turn and see for himself if anything had climbed behind. The canoe was all wrong, a bad job which he must make better at once so that in the morning he would be free of this island prison. The pressure of that other's will grew stronger, and the Terran read into that the overconfidence which he believed would be part of the enemy's character. The one who was sending him to destroy his own work had no suspicion that the victim was not entirely malleable, ready to be used as he himself would use a knife or a force axe. Shann strode steadily downslope. With a small spurt of fear, he knew that in a way that unseen other was right. The pressure was taking over, even though he was awake this time. The Terran tried to wheel his hand to his stunner, but his fingers fell instead on the hilt of his knife. He drew the blade as panic seeped in his head, chilling him from within. He had underestimated the other's power, and that panic flared into open fight, making him forget his careful plans. Now he must wrench free from this control. The knife was moving to slice a hide lashing, directed by his hand, but not his will. A soundless gasp, a flash of dismay rocked him, but neither was his gasp nor his dismay. That pressure snapped off. He was free. But the other wasn't. Knife still in fist, Shann turned and ran upslope, his torch in his other hand. He could see a shape now writhing, fighting, outlined against a light bush. And fearing that the stranger might win free and disappear, the Terran spotlighted the captive in the beam, reckless of Throg or enemy reinforcements. The other crouched, plainly startled by the sudden burst of light. Shann stopped abruptly. He had not really built up any mental picture of what he had expected to find in his snare, but this prisoner was as weirdly alien to him as a Throg. The light on the torch was reflected off a skin which glittered as if scaled, glittered with a brilliance of jewels in bands and coils of color spreading from the throat down the chest, spiraling about upper arms, around waist and thighs, as if the stranger were a treasure house of gems as part of a living body. Except for those patterned loops, coils, and bands, the body had no clothing, though a belt about the slender middle supported a pair of pouches and some odd implements held in loops. Roughly, the figure was more humanoid than the Throg's. The upper limbs were not too unlike Shann's arms, though the hands had 4 digits of equal length instead of 5. But the features were non-human, closer to Sauron in contour. It had large eyes, blazing yellow in the dazzle of the flash, with vertical slits of green for pupils. A nose united with the jaw to make a snout, and above the domed forehead a sharp V-point of raised, spiky growth extended back and down until between the shoulder blades it widened and expanded to resemble a pair of wings. The captive no longer struggled, but sat quietly in the tangle of the snare Shann had set, watching the Terran steadily as if there were no difficulty in seeing through the brilliance of the beam to the man who held it. And oddly enough, Shann experienced no repulsion towards its reptilian appearance as he had upon first sighting the beetle Throg. On impulse, he put down his torch on a rock and walked into the light to face squarely the thing out of the sea. Still eyeing Shann, the captive raised one limb and gave an absent-minded tug to the belt it wore. Shann, noting that gesture, was struck by a wild surmise, leading him to study the prisoner more narrowly. Allowing for the alien structure of bone, the non-human skin, this creature was delicate, graceful, in its way beautiful, with a fragility of limb which backed up his suspicions. Moved by no pressure from the other, but by his own will and sense of fitness, Shann